Hi, my name's Bob Greenyer, and I'm a volunteer with the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. So welcome to O-Day, Clouds and Tornadoes, this 12th of July 2023. Hello Ken Pratt, Shanyak, Jack, Artifact, Kevin Smith, Terran Art. Thank you for joining me this evening. I was just a 6-year-old choir boy when I first heard my much older sister playing Kate Bush's Wuthering Heights over and over. And you know what? I didn't mind. I was in my then treble range and so sang along, which probably annoyed my sister. I even did it with my kids recently in falsetto. Yeah, that would get annoying after a while. Kate was a class act with a wide and very creative repertoire. A real voice, classical dance, often driven by classical themes and great stories. So, Eric MC and Space Case Louis Navarro, can you hear me? Cosmic Dave. One of my favourite songs of this great artist is Cloud Bursting, where Kate plays the role of Peter Reich, having read the book that he wrote about his father Wilhelm. Thank you for the confirmation. If you haven't seen it, you are in for a real treat. The short film is a masterpiece music video with some input from other great artists. You must check it out. Now, I'm just going to look at a few frames in the video. Just for the sake of argument here. So, Wilhelm Reich believed that a substance he called orgone energy was a universal life force that could be measured and manipulated for healing purposes. And Wilhelm Reich is played by Donald Sutherland here, the Canadian actor. And his son, Peter Reich, on the floor here, is played by Kate Bush herself. And this is the so-called Cloudbuster, which is inaccurate, but it's Terry Gilliam, I think, sort of art director on this. It's more fanciful, but whatever. Anyway, so this is about the love of a child for her father and thinking they're a genius. And this whole thing, which you can see, I can't really show you. And basically, the authorities don't like what he's doing, and they come and seize him. Like I say, go and watch this in your own time. This is the authorities. It's very, very blurred for a reason, because it's super sketched. So they come in and break up his papers and smash up his stuff. Turn everything out, smash up his stuff. And then he's dragged away, and he actually went to jail, basically because he said that these orgone accumulators, and this actual here is a child being portrayed as realizing that an adult can be fallible. And anyway, she gets the thing working, and the rain comes down, and that's all that matters to the inventor and to the child. And that is the story there. Okay. So, basically, he ended up dying of a heart attack in jail a year after he was forced to burn his own books and destroy his equipment, and apparatus were destroyed. And so Kate Bush got inspiration from his son's book and wrote this absolute masterpiece of a song and took part in this video. It's fascinating. Go and read the description of the making of video and who was involved. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. So now, why did I feel compelled to talk about this today? Well, it was something that was said by Simeon Hein in his recent video about ball lightning and more, all the way through to crop circles. And it'll make sense in a little while why I thought his intuition was bang on. It's something that I actually spoke about when I was asked some time ago about actually the Cloud Buster. But I kind of want to flesh it out a little bit more now, bringing in some of the insight that we've had in the past from our own work and from the likes of Alexander Shishkin. And maybe we can get a fuller picture of how the Cloud Buster might hypothetically work. I think it probably does. Certainly I've seen lectures about an organization that goes around calling itself the greening of the desert, and they claim to have successfully used these devices to encourage cloud formation and raining. And so Simeon's on the chat here, so I think you're going to enjoy this. And it's essentially a lot of the learning that we've learned, something that I said about Hutchison effect, combined with some work by a guy called Frolov, who I believe ran the Faraday lab, I think in St. Petersburg, and has been kind of like doing my role, but in the Russian sphere, for many more years than I have been involved with this space, and has written books on it in both Russian and English. But anyway, what you are looking at here on this title frame here is actually one tear out of a hornet's nest that took residence in a property I had at one point. And here it is. It's a thing of incredible beauty. Okay, so you can see that next to my face. It's that big. And this is not the biggest here, but there was a whole bunch of them stacked on top. You can see it's kind of like domed like a mushroom. Okay, and on the back side, the hornets have actually built from the inside out, as one might imagine they would do, in these radial arcs on the capping of these the hexagon comb structure here. And these are physically very large. I would suggest that these are maybe 8, across the short distance, maybe 8 millimeters, maybe more actually. I don't know, I should probably get the calipers out actually. Let me see with a tool. How big is this? Try not to break it. It is. Wow. So, no, it's actually bigger. So, that I think is around about 11 millimeters for the short distance across, not corner to corner, but side to side. You can probably work out what it is across the long side from that figure. And the amazing thing with this is that, you know, you can imagine several hornets working away on this, and how they get it all so absolutely perfect. So maybe 12 millimeters across there. How on earth do they coordinate and end up by making such a perfect thing? Now, the little area that's damaged in the middle is actually where they build a sort of almost like a vortex shape here to join to the next level. Okay, and it would come up like with these. They have these kind of little pillars that come up. There's a few that you can see still there that join onto the level above. It is a thing of great beauty, and it's natural. And the Hornets don't go to Hornet school for learning how to build that, do they? There's something innate in their connection with the Akashic record or within their DNA somehow that allows them to know to do that. Hi, David Butlier. Great to have you here. And Mescal. Hi, Paul O'Neill. Wonderful for quorum here. Okay, so the thing that I was referring to was actually presented some time ago by Alexander Frylov in a Russian presentation. But it was also presented at... let me just get the details for you here. It was presented at APEC the 27th of the 11th, 2021. And actually, I was the other speaker that day. So it was Alexander Frolov first, and then my good self talking, I think, to the APEC community for the first time about exotic vacuum objects. Okay. And so he, in his presentation, he showed this image on the left here, which he had showed a number of times before, and is actually in another document that I had acquired when I was looking at devices in the vortex sort of rank Hirsch type vortex tubes. And it happened to be in there. And he talked about it in one of the Russian meetings, and then he talked about this in this APEC meeting. And what he is, this actual image is from Grebenikov's My World or whatever it is book. And it says here, Viktor Grebenikov discovered force effects for cavity honeycomb structures. Simple experiment allows to see real repulsion forces of two stems or bundles of grass. It is useful to find distance d for maximum of the effect. Now, this is where I kind of like, you know, I kind of understood how this worked. And Simeon Hein, sorry, I'll get your name right eventually. Simeon Hein suggested that crop circles, even if they are not made by some other influence other than man, even if they're man-made, seem to appear, or in some cases appeared to present some of the effects. And he suggested that this might be maybe because, you know, of the orientation of the stems. I would argue, Simeon, you are right on the money. Okay, so with regard to Viktor Grebenikov, I have a lot more material to share about his bug wings and stuff at a different time. That's going to be a whole other series of presentations. But for this instance, we have this, effectively this is a big bundle of straws bound together so that they are all parallel. And where and why is this interesting? Well, he is arguing that because of the structure of these things, they end up by producing de Broglie matter waves, which is essentially what you are producing when you are producing matter waves. Matter waves of what? I don't know, but in the ether is the suggestion here. All atoms produce de Broglie matter waves in ether. It is free. No need to spend fuel or energy to get the waves by this way. Regular cavity structures, honeycombs, produce powerful effects due to interference of the waves. Okay? And so vibrations of the atoms in one element of cavity structures in some tube. Radial vibrations are weak. Axial vibrations are powerful. So what they're saying is because the diameter here of the tube is very small, there's very little vibration here, and they can't become sort of effectively coherent, right? Whereas you can have very long wavelengths and very much more intense waves forming in this direction. And so essentially by putting a bundle of these things together and cutting them all to the same length, you end up by producing a coherent matter wave, and he is arguing that that is a de Broglie matter wave in the ether. Now, what is the ether? Well, I just want to show you the paper, the book that I came across when I was looking at vortex tubes, and where it is in there, and essentially that is what I'm going to talk about for the rest of this talk here, because there is so much in this particular little magazine that was produced in 2005 that it is it's very necessary to talk about this right now, particularly with the Wintex coming on and with HHO work being done by various parties. So here, this is again, so the magazine that I'm talking about here is called New Energy Technologies, okay? And this is from issue number 4, and it's from 2005, published by the Faraday Lab Limited, Russia, okay? Research on advanced aerospace systems and new energy sources. And apparently that this was kept financed by Dr. Christopher Bremner, who doesn't sound particularly Russian, so I imagine this is kind of like support by a interested American, I guess. I don't know. I haven't looked into that. But for whatever reason, I thank this individual for enabling this work to come out. Okay. So here is the diagram again repeated by Alexander Frolov, and it says, Figure 1 is a set of pipes which creates standing waves in ether. Standing waves in ether. Now, what do we know from ultra? We know that from ultra and other things that we've used to demonstrate this process, that when you have standing waves, you have areas along those waves which allow for coherence to form and for clusters and for manipulation of matter. And in the other document that I referred to, when you have a couple of these interacting with each other, you can have interference effects where you could get, again, these sort of nodal areas on wave interactions between the matter waves. Now, what is the ether? Well, if we argue that the ether is relic neutrino clusters, well, has someone said that? Well, I think they have. So, essentially, in this article that I translated from Alexander Shishkin called Where is the Atom Battery, which was my second scientific question. The first one was, when I was 5, was where is the, why are the elements on the Earth where they are? And the second one was, why do atoms keep working? Okay, so this is a great little article here, which he gave me permission to translate. And it's essentially, you know, why these things still occur. And in here, he talks about various different things that are all probably the same thing. So starting in this paragraph, he says, soft X-rays with energies up to 10 kiloelectron volts are constantly recorded under any rapidly occurring mechanical or electromagnetic effects on matter, and are associated with the formation and destruction of energy clusters, ECs. This is described in detail in another one of the references here. Energy clusters are quasi-stable formations. They are constantly present around us, but fundamental science, as a rule, does not notice these formations. Energy clusters have gone by many names. Tesla called them radiant energy. Wilhelm Reich called them orgone energy. George Messiatz called them ectons. Ken Shoulders called them charge clusters. Yuji Bajatov called them erzions. I.M. Shekparanov called them Kozyrev-Dirac monopoles. Leonid Ritskev called them Loschek monopoles. In everyday life, this phenomena is called static electricity. John Hutchison was building up static electricity. They led to types of monopoles. Ken Shoulders derived them as being charge clusters or EVOs. George Messiatz then came in 1996 and talked about ectons, and Ken Shoulders, or rather the person that had bought his patent, said, well, sorry, Ken Shoulders has already got this patented. Obviously, we've discussed how it seems to be quite obvious that radiant energy are these same things. Wilhelm Reich, however, orgone energy. Okay? So let's have a look at Cloudbuster, or should I say, we should maybe look at Wilhelm Reich here. This is Wilhelm Reich. And he was a psychoanalyst, and possibly we should look at some Cloudbusters. So let me see if I actually bother to get some Cloudbuster things here. So the theory with the Cloudbuster is you have a lot of tubes that are thin-walled, but very long, and parallel to each other. That would fit with the understanding of Frolov creating these matter waves, and in theory, likely coherent matter waves. So here is the company that I was talking about, or one of the companies, called Orgone Lab here, and it's talking about a new method for drought abatement and desert greening, cloud busting. 1950s discovery now tested globally holds promise to end droughts and diminish wildfires and green the deserts. Method already proven in Israel, Africa, USA, and elsewhere. I will include these links. So here's a picture of one of these cloud busting devices. Now, what is critical about a cloud buster is that it has a series of long parallel pipes. Okay, these are connected to a slightly smaller pipe and a tube that then the tube goes down into water. Now, what was the claim by Wilhelm Reich about using water at the other end of this system? Well, he said that water was good at accumulating orgone energy. Now, if orgone energy could be concluded to be neutral energy clusters, magnetotoroelectrical radiation, and we know these things are able to bind to oxygen dissolved in water, as shown by Perevozchikov, and probably the reason why iron was produced in carbon arc experiments, replications of Japanese fellow, I can't remember. Simeon, help me out here. By Bockris and Sundaresan. They had to have oxygen in the water for iron to be able to form. And oxygen was what was above the Chernobyl reactor, in theory, gathering these energy clusters, these exotic vacuum objects, these magnetotoroelectrical radio, this orgone energy, this static electricity, binding to the oxygen and causing a change in the spectral emission lines when it was exposed to ordinary radiation by changing the relationship of the electrons. So what I'm suggesting is that the water plays two roles. One, water vibrates at the kind of frequencies that water vibrates, doesn't it? Okay, water molecules vibrate at the kind of frequencies that water molecules vibrate. Okay, that's kind of a truism. If those vibrations are able to propagate up the tubes, you know, and they get to the end of these tubes, which are all the same kind of length, could you imagine that those vibrations would then set up standing waves in these tubes that would then emit matter waves in the so-called ether, the so-called and form clusters? And what I'm envisaging happens is that maybe these rods are not exactly parallel. There might be some slight offset. Anyway, when it gets to an area in the sky where there is moisture, what you would need to happen is to cause a depreciation in the energy within the water molecules, or the matter of the water molecules, or potentially even the oxygen that's in the air there, extracting the orgone energy, extracting the charge clusters, the neutral magnetotoroelectrical radiation from that area, cooling it, and forcing, either by diffusion of this material from the surrounding area, forcing and pushing water molecules together like that, or by making it literally less energetic, and it's effectively colder because you're doing a single bath thermal extraction type thing, and it forces the nucleation of cloud droplets. I'm really able to see a method by where the signal that is produced by water is able to assist in creating a coherent matter wave that then interfaces with oxygen-rich, moisture-rich air, extracting these clusters from it, and they're effectively traveling down to the sink. And the sink is the water itself, which is able to absorb a large quantity of these things, conducting through the metals and going into the dissolved oxygen in the water. And up in the sky, it is stimulating the formation of these water droplets and the formation of clouds. So Mescal has said that apparently there's stuff about not touching the pipes when it is drawing on dark clouds makes the operator sick. Well, I would suggest that we could probably have a guess at what that is. Riandolfo said, I was in a crop circle 2 miles from home last month, shaped like chakra. Wonderful. So, what I'm saying about the crop circles is, if you've got a load of parallel structures, okay, and then you lay them in a direction, then they are going to have this effect in this matter wave process. And you could end up with a scenario where it's not ball lightning that forms the crop circle, it's the crop circle that forms the ball lightning by producing a vortex in the ether that then starts to self-organize into this structure. It could be that crops themselves partially control the weather. Okay, but the straws aren't necessarily chopped off. I think it's important in crop circles that the stem actually still is connected with the ground. It's not like cut off and then put down. It's either bent down or it is this weird kind of on the nodule effect on some say wheat. The nodule would appear to be maybe turned to a liquid or whatever, or like a microwave has affected it, but it bends down, and so it still continues to grow. Now, the other interesting thing about straws is that it's made of cellulose. And what do we know about cellulose? Well, cellulose is piezoelectric. So it's able to maybe directly convert the vibration of the water in the ground into emissions of vibration at the frequency that water molecules would be resonant to. By that thought, one might think that if you had tubes directly coupled to a piezoelectric material, I don't know, like quartz or something, which could sit in water, that might actually be a very, very effective cloud busting type device. So there's many bits of research you can go and look at on here. But Simeon Hein, I think you had the right idea, and we might like to do some experiments out there. People that have access to a lot of bamboo cane, that have a lot of access to a lot of straw. And you know, I was looking at some of these ancient buildings and thinking, you've got these ancient round huts. You know, you see them all over Africa even still. They were the type of hut that people lived in many, many thousands of years up in Skara Brae, or, you know, some of these ancient sites in the British Isles, for instance. And these round huts would have straw in reed bundles radially around. And you could imagine that that would potentially create a conical coherent matter wave in the ether flux. Okay? And if that's the case, then it might be a really, really good chi driver, because you would have this flux coming from the rim on the outside of the building, going up and out through the roof as like a beam structure, and this might draw into the building like one of those solar towers that they had in Andalusia or Spain or something, where it's drawing the wind in because you've got the draw from the top of the chimney, like a fire does. But instead of talking about the physical movement of air, you're talking about the ether, the orgone energy, this flux movement. Could it have been extremely healthy to live in a conical straw roof structure? Could it have been extremely healthy to have lived in a conical straw roofed structure? Could it have even been more healthy when it rained on there, so the whole thing is covered in water? I don't know. Makes you think. So I think that maybe with this understanding that we are dealing with the same kind of thing, most likely. I do believe that when Shishkin is saying these are the same things, I think he's on the money. I think he's on the money. I think they are the same thing. Okay? Makes a lot of sense. And so if that is the case, then we understand that we must deal with standing waves. Standing waves are the way to... Now, if you have a traveling standing... it's a bit weird. Traveling standing wave, you could shift something, you could trap it and then shift it down. Maybe that's the kind of thing that's going on. Whatever. I am reasonably comfortable with a hypothesis that works along these lines for cloud busting. And I think Simeon Hein's intuition that even crop circles that are man-made exhibit weird effects makes sense when you put it into the context of the understanding of Viktor Grebennikov and the experiments that have been done since on that understanding, where the longitudinal and the latitudinal, or the the axial vibrations compared to the radial vibrations lead to much more coherence and leading to de Broglie wave matter waves in the ether. And if we're saying the ether is this radiant matter, this orgone energy, then I think we have a working method. Okay, so that is that. Now I want to talk about the other aspects of this PDF, because it is quite an extraordinary thing that Frolov put together, and I don't know how many of these were produced and if they are all of a similar quality to this. But if they are, then there is a lot of gold mine out there to be looked into. So the first one is that I think is interesting. Well, let's go and have a look at the introduction here. Like, a role of alternative energy in the development of Russia, Frolov, the invention of the atomic hydrogen furnace. So we'll look at that. Vortex tubes and innovation process, Azarov. The artificial tornado. Vortex fuel-less power engineering, Frolov. Gravity inertial, we won't look at that. Diagravitic effect, we don't need to look at that. Lessons for blah, blah, blah. Needle electrodes, mini. Okay. Tom Bearden's principle looks at the Floyd Sweet device. Influence of ether density on the rate of existence of matter. This, I will share this. It is absolutely beautiful. Okay. Ken Pratt saying, yes, Bob, those magazines were awesome. I agree. But when I'm looking at these, considering the piezoelectric effect, I'm looking at these, considering what we've seen in subsequent experiments. And yeah, it looks very nice. Okay, so the first up is, he is talking about here, William R. Lyne. He's talking about the first time the atomic hydrogen reaction first came to his attention in 1964 when he was studying industrial processes at Sam Houston State University in Huntsville, Texas. Blah, blah, blah. He says, to me, the process seemed valuable, not only because it produces such high temperatures above 3,400 degrees Fahrenheit, enough to melt tungsten. I'm not sure it's doing that. And he even says in the next couple of sentences why he should probably consider it's not necessarily doing that. He says, enough to melt tungsten, the highest temperatures producible by man, but also self-shielding, and can be used to weld diverse metals, often without flux, with a concentrated flame producing little heat distortion. Little heat distortion, but it produces the highest temperature flame. It might just be because of the locality or whatever, but you're kind of saying it's not doing heat distortion, but then it's got the hottest flame ever type thing. But it might just be because of the locality. When welding thin metal in the process, normal diatomic H2 is shot. Anyway, blah, 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 blah. It talks about different things and you don't need. Down here it says, in the atomic hydrogen process, hydrogen is not really a fuel, but rather a medium used in the extraction of and conversion of energy from the ether. By transforming invisible radiation and electrical energy into infrared heat radiation. Well, this guy, William R. Lyne, has his own name for this ubiquitous material. How does the atomic hydrogen obtain its energy if not from the ether? No wonder the establishment scientist doesn't want you to know there is an ether. If we are to believe the law of conservation of energy, and basically it's talking about the early work where you would, and this is a great little diagram to kind of maybe conceptualize. This is his particular view on these things, but he's saying like when you've got normal H2 here and you split it, firstly around the H2 you've got your ether field, the background. Okay, now we would argue that this is our relic neutrinos and clusters thereof. Okay, and potentially charge clusters, this whole mishmash of ubiquitous blobs of potentially weakly interacting massive particles. Okay, then when you split the hydrogen, you end up with the electrons moving out, and the overall combined radius or volume taken by the H1, the atomic hydrogen, is larger than in the molecular state. And in the electrons growing, it traps what they call more zero-point radiation, more of this ether field background in here. And then when this becomes a molecule again, the trapped radiation is converted into heat out. Well, is it? Or does it inject this magnetotoroelectrical radiation clusters? Does it inject that into the metal, disrupting the way that the electrons are able to interact, causing fluidization but not at the melting point, causing at the extreme transmutation by disrupting the electrons? But anyway, the point is that it takes just 103 calories per gram mole to do the dissociation, and when it splits, when it reforms a molecule, you get 109,000 calorie grams atoms. Okay, so there is a massive change here, and he talks about the large disparity between these things, and this was in the Langmuir torch. They found this, or he apparently found this massive discrepancy between the two. But is it actual thermal energy out, or is it doing the work that thermal energy would require a lot more heat for, but it's actually affecting the way the electrons are able to interact? And I'm tending towards potentially the latter, having seen that it isn't producing the temperatures that are claimed. Okay. Anyway, he has this whole device here, which is a hypothesized device. And you get your H2, you have your tungsten electrodes here. Now, since it transmutes tungsten, we know that for certain. It could be that the excess energy in this case is coming from the transmutation of the tungsten electrodes themselves. Okay, so maybe this discrepancy of 109,000 to 103 calories to 109,000 calories per gram atom. This is gram mole. I don't know. I don't know whether the units are the same here, but it is a big discrepancy. Could it be coming from the actual tungsten transmutation and the energy inserted in there? Possibly. Anyway, this is this device, so I thought I'd share this with you. Okay, so that's that. Now, this is basically one of the world's greatest producers of vortex tubes, and this is a wonderful summary of a lot of the history. Again, you have your tornado here, inspired by the tornado, and here are the various ways you can have the single in, the angled in, the double in, and then, oh, this looks a bit like a Windex, doesn't it? We've got 4 injection points here to produce our tornado structure. Okay. And here are a whole bunch of different variety of tools here. And he developed all kinds of different systems. Massive number of different systems. Here you can see the injection of the vorticity there. So this is a great reference for what might be possible. Here's mass manufacturing of chiller units. As far as I understand it, maybe be an assembling a department before assembly of the fan and the jacket of the plate. Oh, okay, whatever. All kinds of different little miniature devices. It's a really major industry in vortex tubes. Okay. And here's just some of the things that they produce, or they produced. And then it goes into industrial uses, and so on. You can have a look at this in your own time. There's a couple of points that I want to draw out. Okay. And where are we? I mean, this is how serious they were. This is a massive, massive mining device. And the cabs were heated or cooled. These large cabs using these vortex devices. They used them everywhere. Here is a hovercraft for personnel carrier. And they have these different air chilling or air heating devices in the cabin. Here is a refrigerated lorry using vortex devices. But when I was reading this, in light of what Simeon Hein speculated, because I knew the thing was in there about the Frolov image taken from the work of Grebennikov, I read this article here. And I won't go through all of it, but it says here, it turned out to be that in a turbulent tornado, a spontaneous heat flow from the axis to the periphery occurs. A flow's nucleus is always colder than the periphery. So, this is going on in a lot of the systems we've been looking at over the last couple of years. Okay? It would appear that something similar is going on in the wind hex, and it's also going on in these vaporizing carburetor type devices. So the first vortex tube patented by J. Rank is the same cyclone, but it was reconstructed in order to obtain maximal cold in the axial part of the vortex flow and accordingly in the periphery one. The temperature difference between the hottest and the coldest layers in the vortex tube can be considerably higher than 100 degrees C. It is amazing that these layers coexist near each other in the centrifugal force field at a distance of some millimeters from each other. So you can literally have one area that's 100 degrees hotter than the other just millimeters away. Why would that occur? Why would you have that kind of lamination going on? Now, temperature division of a tornado, the vortex effect, is the cheapest discovery of the 20th century, which did not require thousands of people and billions of funds. It is cheap, with various constructive realizations, with inexhaustible industrial applications. The forest of realizations is that the vortex tube is an ecologically clean refrigerating machine without moving wearable parts, which does not use greenhouse and ozone destructive gases, freons. Remember that this was published in 2005, and his work that he is discussing in here goes back 20 years from that, so it's from 1985. Today, there are hundreds of inventions in the world concerning the vortex tubes, and more than half of them were made in Russia, in the Soviet Union. Scientific and technical trend is expansive. I can judge by my practice as a researcher, developer of new kinds of production. I have 160 inventions, traditional and new refrigerating equipment, which is ecologically clean, transport machine engineering, technical acoustics, and testing equipment, microchargers with a minimal number of moving parts or without any moving part for operation in zero gravity, and others. More than a half of the inventions and projects are related to multi-purpose refrigerating equipment, inertialess and trouble-free in operation, cheap in production, no maintenance in use, vortex tubes, air coolers for all fields of machine engineering, food industry, and agriculture. It looks like an advert, probably is an advert, but still, the guy absolutely knows his stuff. And that is what makes the next thing he says very, very interesting indeed. This is not only a refrigerating machine of the multi-purpose type. purpose use. The vortex tube can be reconstructed and turned into an elementary vacuum device up to 0.01 to 0.1 atmosphere for non-ferrous metallurgy, a component separator for gas industry and ammonia production, a drop separator and a dryer for compressed air lines, a source of strong up to 162 decibels. That is insanely loud. Acoustic irradiation for testing equipment and intensification of technological processes. Now read this next bit. This is killer. Absolutely killer. A source of tornado nucleus glow. Boom! And also a source of X-ray emission. Boom! Gravitation anomalies, boom, and many other effects for the pleasure of physicists carrying out fundamental research. This is from 30, no, what is it? It's like, oh God, 1985, 95, 2005, 15, like nearly 40 years ago, this guy was understanding that these things could produce the glow of a tornado's nucleus. It could produce X-rays. It has gravitational anomalies. Yeah? It's not surprising, therefore, that other people have found these things subsequently in their own systems. I remember the tornado glow in an ultra experiment, just in free water, that I included on the top of the tornado presentation I did about Matsumoto's, his tornado. But we had this one with a little spot glow in the center of the upper part of the tornado. And here it is, tornado nucleus's glow. X-ray emission, gravitational anomalies. He's working through all these things. A tornado in the atmosphere, an artificial tornado in a tube, is a multi-factor miracle which put many questions for researchers for many years. But we already use it. Let us mark out a temperature component only. So let's focus on the temperature component only. Ranks effect. Even the simplest vortex tube, supplied by compressed air from a factory compressed set, as an additional consumer who requires purchasing and installation an air compressor, so you need an air compressor, allows producing a cold air flow with a temperature from 20 degrees to minus 120 degrees C, and or a hot one with a temperature from 50 degrees C to 120 degrees C. So there are possible options here to create the temperatures we might need in a wind hex by actual airflow itself. That is something to consider. Now, are you going to get back pressure? Where do you dump the extra flow, counterflow that's coming out? Is that going to affect the way it operates? Possibly. Don't know. But I think it's still rather interesting all the same. At this time, back in 2005, according to an incomplete data, there are more than 800 plants using his systems in 160 cities now. The vortex tubes are irreplaceable where it is impossible to install a big Freon air conditioning unit, which requires special maintenance, and so on. And then the other thing that's interesting in this book is, if we go all the way, is all of these Potapoff heat power plants using the vortex flow in water. I talked about this in my Acc presentation. So there's a whole different range of them. This is 500 kilowatts. This is 800 kilowatt heaters. And they claim a high degree of efficiency and so forth. I think this is, you even got a wind power one, but whatever. You can go and have a look at this in your own time. And then down the bottom here, it's got the hydrogen fuel cell. And it looks very modern car, actually, with its funky in-wheel motors, you know, all the way back in 2005. There we go. All right. So, yeah, the artificial tornado section, specifically that of being able to produce the tornado's nucleus glow and X-ray emissions and gravitational anomalies. It is not surprising that he would claim to have observed these things. And essentially all of these things, they're all related to whatever this etheric substance is, this radiant matter that you can cluster, you can extract from matter, and you can dump into matter. And if you dump it into matter, it seems to maybe potentially turn it into jelly, or make it explode, or make it transmute, depending on the intensity at which it is exposed. Okay, so I'm going to have a quick look at your questions here, but essentially this was O'Day clouds and tornadoes, and we discussed that cellulose, a piezoelectric material in the form of straws, could quite easily and potentially produce de Broglie matter waves in the ether. What is the ether? Well, one might say that Wilhelm Reich said it was orgone energy. Ken Scholder says this is ubiquitous, and he called it charge clusters. Shishkin is calling it energy clusters, but it is essentially static electricity, but it can take a neutral form in the form of magnetotellurical radiation or black EVOs. These things can be extracted from matter, they flow through matter, and they can be dumped into matter. And depending on which way they're going, you get weird effects, like matter gets overexcited. It's not hot, but it can basically gellify and interact with other, for instance, in the case of metals, it conducts through the metals. And so if you get two bunches of metals with a lot of this next to each other, then it kind of mashes it all up together and you end up with a so-called weld, but it's not a hot weld. So I've argued that potentially not only can you do a better type of cloudbuster with this level of understanding, because the water was said to be the sink. Wilhelm Reich said water has some property and it's able to absorb this orgone energy. Well, we have a mechanism by which that can occur, right? Then we know that the vibration is important. So if the vibration of water is wanting to talk to the vibration of water at a distance, then maybe it would be good to have a piezoelectric material coupling to the metal tubes. The metal tubes might be sufficient themselves, and you would certainly want the metal to be in the water at some point, but maybe you would want maybe some piezoelectric material, maybe as simple as quartz, to be directly coupled to the metal tubes, and you might end up with a better cloud busting type device. And then when you consider the straws might be producing these de Broglie matter waves in the ether, in this orgone energy, in this charge cluster, these exotic vacuum objects, these static electricity, it's not surprising, therefore, that Simeon Hind's intuition that even man-made crop circles seem to have some of the effects of the clearly non-man-made ones. And I would go further to say that the actual crop circle itself could persist in creating and setting up maybe torsion fields in the environment which could affect life. And we know from crop circle studies that after a crop circle has been on the ground, sometimes you find that crops in subsequent years grow differently. They have different levels of rate of germination, of weight of wheat production or whatever. And could this be because there is a locked in torsion field that is sitting there in the crop field. And could we use this to our advantage? Literally get straw, buy straw, arrange it in a certain way, and end up with better crops. Could we do that? And could the Neolithic, the Stone Age man in a wattle and daub type mud house, a round house, with straws arranged in bundles in a conical fashion on the roof in a roundhouse, be one of the ultimate feng shui house structures that man has ever built, in that potentially it creates potentially a flux of this material, and that if you're in there, it's basically you're in the center of the cone of the flux that it's drawing through. Could they have been healthier because they were constantly energized by the home in which they lived? Could they have been healthier? And that comes down to a lot of these devices that Wilhelm Reich was proposing. It could actually make you healthier. Now, I've argued that if you could get a device that produces a flux of these magnetotoroelectrical radiation, and you could focus that onto your femurs, you could potentially enhance the rate of production of white blood cells. And then if you would do normal standard therapy, say proton beam therapy or radiotherapy on cancers elsewhere in the body, you would get a twofer. You would get the radiotherapy or the proton beam therapy working to destroy the cancer, and then you would get the stimulated white blood cell production to go and kill. And this would work very sit in line well with the work of David Hudson, where he says if you took the ormus before you got cancer, it's a good thing. If you take it after you've got cancer, because it encourages cancer cells to grow, because it's a systemic thing that goes everywhere in the body, it will also accelerate the cancer growth. By doing this topical application to the white blood cell area, of course, if you've got bone marrow cancer, then you wouldn't want to do this, because you'd be accelerating the cancer in your bone marrow. But could it be as simple as getting honeycombs and strapping them onto around your femur, yeah, or straw bundles pointing at your femur? And this, what I'm proposing here, is something that could have a very specific, measurable, testable outcome. What am I saying? I'm saying you could look at the white blood cell counts of an individual, and then you could look at the white blood cell counts of another individual, where they are exposed to bundles of straws pointing towards their femur. And you could also have it so that a different person had the bundle of straws not pointing towards, but orthogonal to, right? So you could show a difference, is it just being in proximity to the straws that does the work, or is it actually having the coherent matter waves in the ether, according to Frolof's words, in play? Haha. So Ken Pratt says they would haul you away faster than Wilhelm. Well, I guess Wilhelm was saying, come into my facility and I'll give you some treatments and it's going to make you feel better. Well, what I'm arguing is potentially Wilhelm at that time didn't necessarily have the ability to test the amount of healthy white blood cells, the count, the T helper cells or whatever they are, the particular count of cells that you'd want for dealing with cancer. But now we do have that. So there is a potential way, which is, what is the worst that can happen? Well, you spend time with a bunch of straws. That's the worst that happened. Yeah. That's the worst that can happen. If it helps people with cancer, then great. Then we've got a story. Cosmic Dave has said cathedral organ pipes under a tall thatched spire. Maybe a weather activation device. Yes. Yes. I would argue that it would be better if those both of those items were connected with water. So, yes, I would encourage you to have a look. I will share this magazine, and I will give all the links that I've talked about today. Are the Hornets that built this, without being asked or without being taught, are they doing it because it's merely the efficient packing of little cellular homes for their growing pupae and for storing their food? Is that it? Is it the most lightweight structure they can build out of cellulose? Or are they doing it because it's an energy structure in its own right and it helps the growing process of the pupa? It helps energize the food that is inserted into the cell by connecting with the environment and forcing a flux of this material through the living and the food for the living. Yes, Felix, I'd say both of these. Yes. Terranart says, things in nature tend to have more than one function. Yes. I can eat my food with my hands, and I can also pick my nose. Very, very useful hands. Can also type. It could be that the people living for thousands of years in roundhouses with straw huts, they just happen to be very successful. They happen to have more babies. The babies were healthier, you know. And maybe they're the ones that survived. Maybe no one knew why. No one knew why. So, Simon Claret said carbon nanotube arrays. I think really, if you look at Frolov's work here, he actually gives an equation here. He says the distance between nodes of the waves, D, equals 2L n plus 1 2k, where n and k are 0, 1, 2. L is the circumference of the tube. N is the number of harmonic of standing waves of the de Broglie matter. K is the number of the antinode. Okay, so I've not really thought about this too much. Someone might like to think about that, but I think you can get some relatively useful information. So it's not just any tubes. I would argue that the diameter and wall thickness of the cellulose tube in a straw is good. Why? Because nature made it. It's already done the calculations, because that's the product that dropped out at the end. You don't necessarily have to rework what nature's already done. It's done it. It's there. That's the answer already. Okay, so if anyone's got any questions, I will answer them as best I can now. If not, I will call it a night, and it's a nice short one. We have 33 concurrent viewers, always good. So again, this was O-Day Clouds and Tornadoes. O-Day, why O-Day? Because O, in my view, is the fractal structure of whatever this material is, and it seems to be the thing that by directing, extracting, or dumping, we can manipulate matter, and it also affects matter that is more obviously living, as in human beings and creatures and animals and plants. And that finding ways to cohere that matter and to manipulate that matter seems to be by doing standing waves. And we have done that in a range of different systems. I believe that the magnetostriction effect is a key component to the way Neil Gould's line reactors worked. And obviously the ultra experiments and all of the cavitation experiments are very dependent on this. The supernova experiment and the nova experiments are dependent on ion acoustic waves in there. Very, very critical for self-organization of matter. And it does it because in this case you have not a big blob of something, you have this very different ability of the matter to vibrate in one plane and the other. And very specifically, not mentioned by Frolov, not mentioned by other researchers, I think that the piezoelectric effect of straw is actually very important in this process, and that we can learn from that when we are referring to things like a cloud buster, and we can potentially improve upon a cloud buster. Again, if you haven't seen it, please go and see the video Cloud Busting by Kate Bush from 1985, I think it was. No, 95, 85? 85, I think. Yeah, 1985. Incredible piece of work. So thank you very much for your time, and I will see you in the next video. Buenas noches, dobre noc, good night, guten Nacht.